Welcome to MUFON Los Angeles. Our speaker this evening is one of the most knowledgeable and charismatic researchers in the field of ufology. His background in the military and his high security clearances have given him the opportunity to see proof of extraterrestrial activity on this planet that would normally not be available to your eye. Building on his deep studies in ancient history, psychology, archaeology, and philosophy, he makes a clear case for interaction between humans and these beings, an interaction with room for love and spirituality. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Bob Dean.
Well, Bob, thank you very much. Hey, give me a hug before you go. Hey,
You bet.
one of my dearest friends. Thank you.
It's great to have you here.
It's good to be here.
Yeah.
As I jokingly say, it's good to be anywhere after some of the things I've been through in the last few years. It's nice to see this crowd. A lot of old friends in the audience here tonight. First of all, I feel honored to have been invited here. Some very special people here in Los Angeles, in the area. Some very knowledgeable people out here. Some researchers that I deeply respect. I've been at this a long time, and for those of you who may have heard me speak before, you know that I don't have a prepared presentation. I never have had. I don't have it typed and prepared and neatly edited and all that. I've never been able to do that on this subject. I keep learning things every day I didn't know before. I keep learning things every year that I didn't know before. I've gone through some very difficult and depressing times in the last several years. I've become totally disillusioned with the United States government, which I will now explain to you why. Many of you know for a number of years I had tried very hard through the process of law, through the process of information, through the legal processes to get the United States Congress to wake up and start paying attention to this issue, which I call the greatest issue of our time and very likely the most important issue in the history of the human race. And I mean that from the bottom of my heart, and I will try to explain before the evening is over why I feel that strongly about this. But anyhow, I tried for a long time to get Congress to pay attention. I was fortunate about a year and a half ago to be able to go to Washington, D.C. and spend 2 full months. I lived in Arlington with my son, who was a career naval officer assigned at the Pentagon, who, by the way, just got promoted to captain in the Navy. And I'm so damn proud of that kid, I don't know what to say. Thank you. I still lived with him in Arlington for about 2 months, and I haunted Capitol Hill. I visited at least a half a dozen Senate offices and about 10 congressional offices, House offices. And I spoke to senators, I spoke to their staffs, I spoke to the representatives about the subject. I delivered them letters, I delivered information. I did not walk in with a camera, nor did I have a press conference, and I didn't rattle their cages or try to call attention to what I was doing. There are a few researchers who have done that and who've gotten no further than I have, frankly. I thought if I was low-key, respected their situation and respected their position, that they would level with me, that I might make some headway in this field, because I believe Congress has and has always had an obligation to the American people. God damn it, there are elected representatives. And I thought, if anyone can do this, you guys can. It has to be done under the process of law. There's a procedure that needs to be followed. I represent what I call an old boys network of military retirees from all services old codgers. Most of us have retired. A lot of us are still on active duty, and quite a few of us are still working in sensitive positions in places like Langley, Fort Meade, and other places throughout the world. I keep getting input from the Old Boys Network. There aren't a lot of us left anymore. When I started with this, there were well over 100 of us. There's only about 60 of us left, and we lose one every few weeks now. Because most of us are late 60s, early 70s, a couple of them up late 70s. And the Reaper takes his toll, as we all know. But I still get input from these guys. I keep getting information, which keeps me on my toes and keeps me active, keeps me traveling and speaking. But anyhow, I lived with these guys in the House offices and I'm the senators. And as I mentioned to a friend of mine this evening, I got one positive response out of all of them, and that was from the office of Senator Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania. Specter was the one senator who had the courage and the honesty to level with me and tell me he knew a little bit about what was happening, but by himself he could not muster enough support either in the Senate or on the Hill to hold hearings. What we had been asking for some years is that they form a committee. God, they form committees at the drop of a hat over everything. You know, they form committees on racehorses. The guys in Kentucky are behind that. You know, everything. Form a committee, hold a hearing. Now, those of us in the Old Boys Network who wanted to testify, we stated that we ask only a couple of things. Senator Demmett, we asked for congressional immunity. We want the hearings to be open, not closed to the public. We'd like for them to be on C-SPAN. And we want you to have the power of, what do they call it, subpoena. Because congressional members have tremendous power if they use it. They can hold a committee, they can hold a hearing, they can have subpoena authority, they can grant immunity, they could do a whole lot of things. And I thought, this is not asking for a lot on what I consider the greatest subject in the history of the human race. I ran into a stone wall almost everywhere. I got the same story again and again and again. They'd set me down, they gave me coffee, they were courteous, they'd give me little ashtrays and little reminders of my visit to their office and all this. You know, I badgered my two senators from Arizona, and I respect, got the same damn thing from them. They won't touch this subject with a 10-foot pole. And I said, why? This is the most important issue of our time, goddammit. It goes beyond the elections. It goes beyond party differences. This is the most important issue in human history. The people have a damn right to know. And I think, as I always said, they had a need to know, which is a military term, which is not too commonly understood. They have a need. You have a need to know. I came off of that thing with my tail between my legs. Beyond the divorce, which I have just gone through, which was a very devastating and painful personal experience, which changed my life, this incident on Capitol Hill a year and a half ago was devastating to me. And I began to lose faith in the American system, a system that I have devoted most of my life to. Almost 30 years in the military and 14 years working with FEMA. Yes, the notorious FEMA. And yes, they got power you wouldn't believe. Anyhow, I have now learned, and this is rather hard to share, it's an emotional issue with me, and it always has been. I have learned that the government we think we have is not the government we got. And there's most of you in this audience particularly are very enlightened people who do homework and do their research. And I think I'm, in a sense, speaking to the choir here. But I find that most people out there, the average American, the hardworking guy who goes to church, pays his taxes, votes once in a while, if the weather's not too bad. Boy, this last debacle was an experience, wasn't it? I don't know. Tom Wolfe, the writer in New York, called it some kind of a carnival, a disgusting carnival, the political system, how we go through it. You know, they estimated that almost $3 billion was spent during the campaign by both parties. That's terrible. As the old joke used to say, we got the best government money can buy. And I used to laugh about that, but it isn't funny. And now with this recent series of events, we had one of the most expensive publicity campaigns in human history, trying to sell us two products, which none of us cared very much about either one of them. And now we got one of them, whether we like him or not. $3 billion? Anyhow, it's worse than that. This is part of the show. This is part of the carnival. The election process every 4 years, every 2 years, is part of the carnival to keep your attention wrapped up in other things like taxes, like government. I mean, they use sports. Look at the sports. Look at the game shows. What's the latest? Temptation Island? I don't know how many of you may watch this thing, but God, be careful, because those things are damaging to your mental health. I hope you don't let your kids watch that crap. Anyhow, you know, I have this tendency, forgive me, I'm an old codger. I have to vent my spleen now and then. So bear with me, because I'm going to do a lot of venting tonight. Anyhow, this thing in Washington, this disaster, what we call our constitutional system. Ladies and gentlemen, what you really have is an oligarchy. And it's plain and simple, and if you don't understand the term, go to the dictionary. It's very clear. We got a few wealthy people running the whole damn program. And our government is not a constitutional system. It is not a democracy. It is not a republic. And they keep telling you that it is. But it isn't, and don't be snowed by this. I don't think most of you are. Matter of fact, I know this crowd out here is pretty enlightened. Anyhow, that experience I had about the fact that there is no hope of getting what we would call a disclosure on this subject out of our government. It ain't gonna happen. It ain't going to happen next week. It ain't going to happen next year. And it will happen eventually, but our government will have nothing to do about it. Because the discovery or the disclosure is in someone else's hands. And it is not Majestic 12 either, or whoever the hell they call themselves now. Whether it's PI 40 or whatever. As I was sharing again with this friend this evening, I learned some time back from a very wealthy, wise man in Nevada, Bob Bigelow, who told me one time, he says, everybody has their own damned agenda. I've got mine, you've got yours, everyone has an agenda. But he says, Bob, there's only one agenda on this subject. This UFO, extraterrestrial intelligence, reality. There's only one agenda. And I said, yeah. He pointed up. He says it's their agenda. It always has been. And they're the ones who will handle a disclosure when the time comes. When they have decided that you're ready for the truth. And you know, I have come to believe that, and I have accepted that because I know that the truth is indeed far greater than anyone can imagine. And I've even reached a point which is almost embarrassing to admit, that I've almost developed a sense of pity for some of the guys I've been maligning for the last 10 years. Oh, I've called them all kinds of names, many times right to their faces. I figured I earned that privilege. I've developed a sense of pity for them and a little bit of understanding because I've learned over the years. Thanks to my own research, thanks to my affiliation with the old boys who are still active, I say we got them all over the place. We've even got a couple in FEMA at Emmitsburg, Maryland at the Emergency Management Training Institute. The subject and the story is such an incredible thing that government is incapable. They have no power to tell you these things. They don't know how to tell you these things. Because if they told you this much, you would want this much. And I'll be honest with you, they don't know this much. Even after all these years, there are a few who know the whole story. I wouldn't venture to say there's probably no more than 500 on the planet who know the whole story. That's how big it is. That's how sensitive it is. That's why it's so damn sensitive. You talk about compartmentalization in security operations. You talk about right to know, need to know, eyes only, all of the security classifications. And my God, the last I was able to check, there are at least 475 different security classifications running from restricted through confidential, secret, top secret, and beyond. There are levels beyond top secret that you wouldn't believe. They have created over the years, since 1947, the most frightening, the most monolithic, the most powerful national security state that has ever existed on this planet, and it puts the Nazis to shame. We have got people committing crimes daily in our government that we hung guys at Nuremberg for after the Second World War. Well, they're beginning to die out, but we brought 1,000 Nazis to this country after the war with Operation Paperclip and Operation Shamrock. And some of these guys were war criminals who should have been hung, and we brought them over and put them to work. Good guys like Werner von Braun, who was a rented Nazi, helped us build our missile system. Old Werner helped us put the Saturn V together, which got us to the moon. And there lies another story. You were fortunate enough, I understand, last year to have a presentation from Don Ecker, who's the editor of UFO Magazine. And I think Don told you some things about some of the things that cannot be shared with the American people. I don't know how much he told you. I haven't spoken to Don for a time. We have some difference of opinion once in a while, but I do respect the guy. He may have told you about the moon. He may have told you the fact that there are massive operations ongoing on our moon, and they're not ours. That there are massive operations ongoing on Mars, and they're not ours. That there are massive operations going on the planet Earth, and they're not ours. And that there are at least 5 major alien bases on this planet and have been here for hundreds of years. I don't know whether he told you those things or not and where they're located, but I'll touch upon a little of that this evening. We know these things. There's a 25-mile diameter metallic sphere in orbit just beyond our moon. We have photographs of it. Everybody, just about everybody in NASA knows about it, but they haven't said a word to you about it. I've got photographs with me this evening, which I will share you in the second part of my presentation. NASA photographs taken by Apollo 11 and 13 that will blow you out of your seats. Anyhow, Don covered a lot of this, and I won't go over it again, because I imagine he did a pretty decent job of it. But so damn much has happened, and just a few weeks ago I learned some things that shook me up quite a bit. Now, I must say to you, I no longer ever talk about UFOs. It's not a subject I even care to waste the time on. There's not a one of you who's ever done your own homework, done your own research, who's looked at the valid evidence and the data, who does not know that UFOs are real. My friend Stanton Friedman keeps making his little presentation, and I like Stanton. He does a fine job of it. But it's the same damn thing over and over again. UFOs are real. Well, hell yes, they're real. Anybody who's done his homework knows they're real, and we all have a pretty good idea of what they are. They are high-tech, advanced technical devices from somewhere else, and belongs to someone else. And they've been in our skies from the beginning of human history. And I have some photos tonight to share with you, which I will hopefully prove that point. Now, when I was a kid in school years ago, I took a class in journalism, and I had the professors beat the hell out of me, as many of you have had, and they gave us the old 5 W's. If you're going to write something about anything, you got 5 things to cover. Who, what, where, when, and why. And if you touch them all, at some point in your story, I, the editor, will put them in their proper places, and we'll have a story. Well, I tried to follow that thing about this subject. As I said, I don't talk about UFOs anymore. And you will say, well, what the hell do you talk about? I don't talk about what they are because we know what they are. I don't really discuss when, because when is now and always has been. And where? All over the planet and all over the solar system. Now, I begin focusing the last few years of my life, research that I've done, questions I ask, files that I get into, the who and the why. And I presume, and it is a presumption, I presume as a student of history, it was one of my majors in college, that over the years, at least in the last 30 years, I've learned a little bit about the Who. And I'm not talking about the rock band, it's very popular, which your kids, I'm sure, are familiar with. There is a group called the Who. When I talk about the Who, I talk about them, capital, them. And you say, how can you presume to know anything about them? Well, it's amazing how much you can learn about them by studying your history, by studying your theology, and each and every one of your religions. Now, I don't talk about religion. I mean, to me, religions are like UFOs. It's old hat. We're humans on the verge of a new millennium, and we don't really need religions anymore. We don't need that argument, those fights, those differences of opinion. We don't need to know who's a Muslim, who's a Jew, who's a Hindu, who's whatever. We simply need to know that each and every one of us on this planet are human beings. And when we bleed, our blood is red. And we've got to stop killing each other in matters of politics and religion, because we're all one. The issue is not religion, the issue is spirit and soul. And that's the thing we're going to have to confront. But let's get back to what I was talking about. Who? There's an enormous amount of information about these guys, if you really do your homework. Now, it's sad to tell you that over the centuries, our churches have gone out of their way to keep a lot of the information about them away from us. Not only did they re-edit, oh God, they did an editing job on the Old and New Testament that you wouldn't believe. It's amazing the stuff that the church, and I'm not pointing a finger at one particular bunch in the Vatican, although they are, they've got to take their responsibilities for their contribution to this problem over the centuries. And I'll touch upon that briefly because there's an interesting development just 2 months ago. which don't let me forget to go bring this up, about His holiness and what He's up to. Anyhow, the church went out of its way for so long to keep this information from you. Now, what were they really trying to keep from you? They eliminated so much, they even went to the point of writing new stories, new histories, new slants. Boy, they did an editing job that was unbelievable. Only in the last century, and I say this really in honesty, only within the last 100 years have scholars begun to really dig into the history of the human race and learn a little bit about what we have had kept from us. And it has to do with our origins, and it has to do with us, who we are and what we are, and why the hell the churches, and I'm not pointing at anyone in particular, I'm taking them all to task. They're all guilty of it. They established a political system, which the beautiful young man from Galilee would have been appalled by. And I'll tell you even further, he is appalled by it, because that dude is alive and well. And like my fundamentalist friends say, he is coming back, but it ain't going to be like they think. It's going to scare the pants off of most of them. Because the real story is so far beyond anything that they've ever imagined. And most of them are not ready for it. Okay, let's get back to the who. You can point your finger at a bunch of different groups, and most of them are interplanetary. The original group apparently was extraterrestrial in the sense that I mean that they were not here initially on this planet. They came here a hell of a long time ago, exploring or whatever. They found a very primitive kind of creature running around out here, a bloody, savage, kind of man-like hunting ape. And over the process of a long period of time, they took that creature, and by merging his genes with theirs, he created a new species. They call this species Cro-Magnon, or we call it Cro-Magnon. Human species, Homo sapiens. The thinking ape. That thinking word needs to be revised a bit. How thinking are we? Anyhow, that's basically what I understand how it began, and the stories that are told are essentially the same, and you go back in every ancient history and every ancient theology, and you get essentially exactly the same story, whether it's in the Bhagavad Gita, whether it's in the Bible, whether it's in the Quran, which tells that story. They all tell essentially the same story, that man is a hybrid. We have been created by an advanced intelligence, and we're not what we were, and we apparently are in the process of becoming something more than we are now. Because this process is continual, it's underway, it's been going on for 10, 15,000 years. It hasn't stopped. The genetic manipulation of the improvement of the human species is a constant, continuing effort, and apparently we are hopefully making some progress. Well, sadly enough, not enough of us on the planet are making the same strides. But you can call this bunch the Anunnaki. My friend Sitchin says that's what Sumerians called them. And the Sumerians knew them well because the Sumerians worked for them. How many of you know that the old ancient Sumerian word for worship means to work for? Kind of an interesting slant, I thought. Well, our ancestors in Sumer, worked for them. And they did not initially deify them. They were afraid of them. They were in awe of their power, but they didn't deify them. They did that later. They did that primarily after the big guys left. Although my friend Sitchin tells me, he says, what makes you think they ever left? They never did leave. They just sort of withdrew out of the focus. They withdrew out of the overt, obvious relationship that they had with us. They've always been around. They've had a hand in a lot of things. One of the greatest secrets, in my opinion, and this again, remember, this is my opinion, folks. I'm telling you things tonight I have seen, what I've learned, and what I've concluded. They had a hand in the 7th century. They scared the pants off of a poor old Arab who was hiding in a cave not too far from Mecca. You're all familiar with that story, I'm sure. They had a hand in a series of events that took place in Galilee, in Palestine, 2,000 years ago. Oh, they had a big hand in that event. They were present at the beginning of the whole series of events, and they were present at the end of it. And they've been present ever since in subtle, not so obvious ways. Because after a certain period of time, and Neil Freer, my friend and philosopher in Santa Fe, New Mexico, says, based upon his research, they probably withdrew overtly about 1200 BC. They had had a series of interfamily fights themselves. They were initially, hopefully they're still not, a dysfunctional family. And we are members of that family. So when you look around the world, you see a dysfunctional human race. It's not unnatural to consider that we came by it honestly, because we have their genes in our bodies. We wear their genes, as the soldier goes. You guys have Anunnaki blood in you, whether you like it or not. I call it starseed. You all have starseed, and you all know that at some deep level. And most of you in this room have known that since you were little kids. But you never told anybody about it. Who were you going to tell? Mom and Dad? It's like me telling my mother I remembered being born. Scared the hell out of her. I got spanked. So I shut up about it. Anyhow, we're back to the who. Who are they? Well, we've learned over the years that it's not simply one group. When I left the Army in '76, when I retired, military authorities in security, highly classified guys who really had some hands in the real pie. We knew about 4 different groups back in '76. The NATO study in '64 assumed basically there were 4 different groups. Now, these are different species, apparently. These are different intelligent groups from somewhere else. We assumed interplanetary. Over the years, we've assumed that they're interstellar, some probably intergalactic. And over the years, by the time I left the service in '76 and lost my military clearance, we had even learned that some of them are multidimensional. And that is dynamite, because I don't know who can really understand that. I can't. I have a friend in New York by the name of Kaku, Michio Kaku, who's a brilliant physicist who's written a series of brilliant books, which you should read. Michio tells me that there are at least 10 different dimensions, possibly 11. They're still playing with number 11, but they know there are 10. Well, we're dealing with intelligences who are not only interplanetary, interstellar, intergalactic. We're dealing with advanced intelligence that are multidimensional, and some of them are so damn far beyond us that we, when we confront them, immediately determine that they are divine, that they are gods. Well, they are not gods. And they are no more divine than you are, because you are a divinity, whether you know it or not. I've always loved the old Hindu gesture. I think they call it namaste. And you're all familiar with it. You greet people with it, you say goodbye to people with it. And it essentially means this, that the divinity within me is simply saluting the divinity within you. And that's a very true thing, and it's a beautiful philosophy, and I always liked it, and I try to use it, and I encourage you all to do the same. You are divine. Divinity has been placed within you. As you are a highly developed biological species. You are an highly developed soul. That the body was prepared to be the container for your immortal soul. And that's what you are, infinitely and forever. And you reincarnate here on this planet. You may reincarnate God knows how many other places in this infinite universe of time and space. And you never die, and deep within your soul you never forget. And that's important, to come to terms with that and look within and bring that out of you. Because that is the one thing that will help you survive the things that you're going to have to endure over the next 25 years. Because the next century is going to be incredible. If you think the last 1,000 years have been exciting, you ain't seen nothing yet. I was talking to Don earlier. We were chatting in dinner, and I said, you know, I would almost go on the point of predicting. I don't like to prophesy, but I would predict over my 72 years of life that I will say this. Two things are going to be happening in this century to the world that will change it so completely that it will never, ever be the same. One will be the recognition and the open, overt confrontation with our extended family. And I venture to say that will happen within 10 to 12 years. I don't think there's any mistake about the fact that the Mayans had their calendar coming to an end in the year 2012. They even pinned it down to the day, December the 23rd, 2012. What did the Mayans know that we're only now beginning to learn? Well, my prediction is that we're going to confront our extended family in the next 12 years. That's going to shake up the whole world. It's going to shake up the whole world theologically. Not only is it going to play hell with the stock market, which is not going to be anything compared to the shake-up in the Vatican and in Mecca and in Cairo. Every major religion on this planet, probably other than the Hindus and the Buddhists, are going to be having hell to pay. The Buddhists and the Hindus can generally, I think, endure it and deal with it because they've been teaching that essentially from the beginning of their history. But I say that will happen by 2012, and I think that's probably the reason why we're going to end the old calendar and begin the new calendar. We'll begin a cosmic calendar, starting with the year 2013, but we'll call it something else. The cosmic year 1, when the human race finally set itself free and began to understand not only who they were, but what they are. And God, I wish I could hang around to see that. I'm going to work at it. As I say, I feel like the phoenix rising from the ashes after the divorce. I still enjoy a good cigar, a good Jack Daniels, and the sight of a pretty girl. Amen. Hallelujah, brother. When I cease to be excited and amazed at the beauty of a woman, then it's time to go. And I'm not talking about just young girls. I have adored the goddess all my life. I have adored Inanna, the traditional goddess, Astarte, Ishtar, whatever word you use for it. I'm not Catholic, but I know basically who that beautiful lady is that keeps showing up all over the world. The Catholics call her Mary. What did they call her before Jesus was born? Because that beautiful lady has been in our lives from the beginning of human history. She's a manifestation of femininity, of a living, breathing soul. Our ancient ancestors called her all these different gods, goddesses, Astarte, Ishtar, Isis. Oh, I loved her as Isis. Anyhow, I've been in love with her, and I see every woman in this audience is a manifestation to me of the goddess. Now, you guys don't have to worry. I'm not going to embarrass myself by... Anyhow, I love women. I can't help it. Always have. Now, we're talking about who. As I said, years ago, the military knew of 4. They were all humanoid. The NATO report in 1964 concluded that there were 4. They were all humanoid. That means that they had 2 arms, 2 legs. They stood upright. They had a head. They had eyes. But they were different. Some of them couldn't walk down the street without causing chaos. Some are little dudes and some are big dudes. And some of them with the vertical pupils really shake people up. And we run into all of them over the years. But the one that upset the military the most when I was in the military was that the guys that looked just like us. The ones who looked exactly like us. And I told this story so many times, but if it is true, the military, if we weren't paranoid when we went in, we were certainly trained to become so. It's the nature of the game in military service. The idea that there was an off-planet intelligence in our midst that we couldn't identify or recognize really upset the guys in the security business. Still does. And I'm talking about the guys at Fort Meade. It still bothers the hell out of them. In 1964, the generals and admirals of SHAPE said, these guys could be walking up and down the corridors of SHAPE and we wouldn't know. Lieutenant Colonel, we were having lunch one day, said, you know they could be walking up and down the Pentagon. And one smartass who'd had a little too much wine, and in France in those days we were forced to drink wine. We had no choice. It was on the luncheon menu and you had to take it. It's part of the tradition. I think the colonel had a bit too much. He says, damn it, they could even be in the White House. And there was, at the same moment, some forced laughter, like I had just heard here from you guys, about that possibility. Now, I will tell you that I've never had any misgivings about the guys in the White House being alien. I've had some experiences. Some of them have been pretty damn weird, but they're not alien. The last one was one of the weirdest we've ever had. Well, he's out of office, or he will be out of office Saturday, so, I never spoke out against the president when I was on active duty because, there's a military rule that you can be court-martialed for that. Of course, under military law, you can be court-martialed for a hell of a lot of things you can't be cited for in civilian life. Anyhow, we're back to who. 4 different groups, and recently I suspect that there may be as many as 100 or so coming and going from God knows where. When you consider this immense size of the universe, the fact that we could be having visitors from other galaxies, the fact that we could be having visitors from other dimensions, and the fact is apparently we have, and some of them that have had a hand in the establishment of the major religions on this planet are probably the more advanced from different dimensional levels. Oh, one of the other things I wanted to throw out before I forget it is that I also predict before the end of this century, and you mark my words, probably the single most powerful event in human history that will occur, and it may happen sooner than you all think, is that science is going to recognize the reality of the human soul. And that's going to change everything. Our ancestors knew this. Most of us know this deeply within ourselves. One of the greatest crimes against humanity in the last 200 years has been what has been called the rise of secular humanism. Well, we're going to discover the reality of the human soul. And think of what that's going to do. That each and every one of us are immortal beings. That we never die. And that we remember everything that ever happened. And that's why I say to each and every one of you, as an old fart whose trip on this planet is almost over, every thought, every act, and every word is part of a permanent record in time. So what you think and what you say and what you do is crucial, primarily to you and to your immortal soul. But this ain't a sermon, so let me go on. Okay, the ones we don't recognize, the ones who are probably in our midst, the ones that I suspect are very often attending UFO conferences. I almost intuitively know this because I've almost seen a couple of them. Intuitively, I've sensed their presence. I've almost recognized them when I run into some of them. I've attended UFO conferences all over the world for the last 15 years. I've spoken in 30 different countries, I think. 45 of the 50 states. And I've always suspected that in the larger conferences, like the Bay Area here recently, in San Jose, San Mateo the year before, and in March, this coming March in Laughlin, there's usually at least one, maybe two, because they travel in pairs. Extraterrestrials. I don't use the word alien. Alien is a dirty word. I hate it. It's a divisive word. I don't even like to use it when we talk about the Mexican-American problem along the borders. Alien is a divisive word. So don't ever use the damn word. Talk about extraterrestrials, if you will, off-worlders, other dimensionals, whatever. They're all living beings with souls. Anyhow, I've always suspected they were in the audience. So if there's one or two here tonight, I salute you. Thank you for coming. I hope you paid for your ticket. Now, let me get back again because I tend to do these. I ramble. Forgive me, people. What was it that I suspect Ecker told you back last year? Did he mention the mascons on the moon? Mascons are two enormous mass concentrations that apparently are under the surface of the moon. They are apparently metallic and they're gigantic. They are several miles across, and there are two of them, and they are so definite and so large that they affect the orbit of our lunar satellites that we put up there. They affected the orbit of our Apollo launches when they were in orbit up there. Subtly, not a lot, but just enough that the guys knew that something was there. These mascons, NASA knows all about them. They know how big they are. They know where they are. One is on this side of the moon and the other one is on the other side of the moon, which interestingly enough we never see. Which interestingly enough we have seen now through the thanks of Clementine, which was a mission that was sent by the Army around the moon, where they took something like 10,000 photographs, and you guys have seen only maybe about a dozen out of the 10,000. The reason you haven't seen the others is that there were things in there they didn't want you to see. And I have a couple of shots tonight to show you that on my slideshow. Anyhow, I don't know whether Don touched up on the mascons. The fact is that when we got there, Armstrong and Aldrin and some of the other guys, we were flat-ass told to get off and stay off. That's why the Apollo program came to an end, and the excuse they gave to the American people was it was a budgetary problem. We just didn't have the funds to do it anymore. And they said this through the side of their mouth because we had 3 complete, finished, and paid for Saturn V systems ready to go. And they scrapped them. And we never went back after the last launch. We went through motions. We went up a few times, walked around a little bit, swatted a golf ball or two, scurried back, and we never went back. There's a retired scientist living in Northern California by the name of Norman Berggren, who spent years working with NASA and a lot of other advanced aerospace programs, who's written an incredible book, which I urge you all to read, called The Ringmakers of Saturn, by Norman Berggren. And I have a couple of shots that Norman has shared with me to show you tonight about a couple of artificial objects that have been photographed by the Voyager in the rings of Saturn, which will blow your minds. Anyhow, try to read Norman's book. It's excellent. It's filled with photos. He's a genius. He's a little dude with a bow tie, and he's one of those guys that's pure brilliance. Anyhow, who are we talking about? Well, as we say, 4 different groups, maybe lots more, but there apparently is an organization of some kind. Now, a lot of my friends who are deeply into New Age research tell me that they are called the Galactic Federation. Well, this smacks of Star Trek and all that good stuff, and I enjoy Star Trek. I'd like to know where some of the writers get their stories, because they're right on. Anyhow, now it may be an organization. The evidence is that there is some kind of an agreement between some of these different groups, because we've seen them together. People have been abducted on ships and have seen them interrelating with each other. The little dudes, the very big guys, and the humans. And a lot of people have thought the humans were U.S. military. Well, they weren't. They were probably Anunnaki. Because they look so much like us, they could be in our midst. Anyhow, the other question in the famous 5 W's is why? I got to touch upon that here. God, we're getting toward 10 o'clock. And I got a slideshow. Oh, yes, I got. This is Arizona time, yeah. Okay. Get toward 9. Yeah. Now listen, if you want me to shut up, just tell me. If not, I'm going to stay up here until I finish some of this. Thank you. Okay. We've talked about who. We have a pretty good idea of who. Not only did they have a hand in what happened outside of Mecca, 7th century, they had a hand in the entire series of events of that young man from Galilee. And if those of you who are Christian, go back to your Bible and read what he had to say about who he was. And interestingly enough, without all of the editing and all of the deletions, some of it got into the 4 Gospels, where he said, I'm not from here. This is not my world. This is not my kingdom. If I were in my kingdom, you couldn't do to me what you're doing. Which was literally beating the hell out of him and hanging him on a cross. He says, in my own Father's house there are many mansions. And he says, I have other flocks. I have other people to teach. And he said so many things that they didn't understand then. And only now are we beginning to grasp, because only now are we pulling ourselves away from that insidious, lying political structure of the religions on the planet. He said, what I do, even you can do. He says, you are as gods. And he meant that. He says, what I do, you can do, and even more. And everybody looked at each other. What the hell is he talking about? Well, go back and read what he had to say. It means a lot more when you really put it in the context of modern knowledge and what you've been able to learn in the last few years. Okay, let me move on. People say, who the hell are you? I mean, goddammit, you're just an old fart with a ponytail, and why should I listen to you? And I say, look, you shouldn't listen to me particularly. I mean, don't believe a word I've said. Do your own homework. Reach your own conclusions, because all I'm sharing with you is what I've concluded. And whether you like it, whether you don't, I don't much care. Well, actually, that's a lie. I do care. Frankly, I do care. It's important to me when I get comments from you guys that a few words that I've shared with you meant something to you. That's important to me. Thank you for sharing that. And so it does matter. But in the terms of the longer view of history, you don't have to listen. Just listen to whatever it is I have to say, and if there's anything there that's of value to you, fine, take it. If not, forget it. But people ask me how I presume to know these things, and I don't. I simply have done some detailed research over 30 years, closer to 40. I was trained in the military to be an intelligence analyst, and that is a simple thing, meaning that you are trained to evaluate data. And I've applied that to my research in the UFO field and the extraterrestrial reality. I take massive piles of data and I go through it. And it's like the old jigsaw puzzle. After several hours, and you put this piece here and that piece there and so on and all, and you end up to get a picture of some kind. And it's kind of interesting because at the beginning, it's not making a lot of sense. And then you look at it closer and add another piece or two there, and you begin to get a picture which literally blows your mind. And that's what's happened to me. And that's why I'm here. My son says, "Pop, why the hell don't you behave yourself?" He says, "You've had a long career, you're highly decorated, you've been every goddamn place. Sit on the patio with your cigar and your Jack Daniels and enjoy life." And I say to him, "You know, your point is well made. But I says, I feel so strongly about this that if there's anything at all I've discovered in my 72 years, I want to share it before I go." My son, by the way, knows most of what I'm sharing with you tonight. He's a career naval officer. And for those of you who don't know it, the United States Navy has been #1 in the field of extraterrestrial research from the very beginning. It's not the Air Force. It's the Navy. And they've been involved up to here since Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was an admiral who was apparently a member of Majestic 12, who also was one of the first directors of Central Intelligence. Roscoe made the point before he died that his Navy was going to be the lead in this, and they are, and they're running Site 51 over there. That's a whole naval operation. Bob Vazar's paycheck showed that. I mean, Department of Naval Research, Office of Naval Research, Naval Intelligence, I think. Now, let's move along. Why do I feel so strongly and why am I speaking out so bluntly about some of this? It's a little bit about what I think is happening. It's happening here now to all of us. It's part of the why. Why are they here? Why have they been here? Why are they interested in us? Why do they give a damn about us? Why, when they have worlds and worlds of planets and stars and galaxies that they travel to and can use, what are they doing here? Messing around in this little mud puddle with a bunch of little squealing, squirming worms. It's because whether you like it or not, whether you can accept it or not, they apparently love us. Like you love your little kids. Like you love a troublesome adolescent teenage child who is so goddamn ornery sometimes you'd like to whack him up one side and down the other, and yet you still love him. And you don't throw him into the street. And you stay there and you teach and you guide and you instruct and you pray a lot so he'll grow up. And that's my conclusion of why they're here. They are here to assist us in a process. Now, what is that process which I believe is taking place, has been underway for a long time, and is now beginning to reach what I would call fruition? The SHAPE study in '64 concluded that there was some process or program underway. That was part of the disclosure. They didn't know then what it was, but they concluded that they could see that something was happening, something was progressive, something was taking place. Well, I've concluded that they're here to help us make what I would call a transition. It's a transition from one state to another. It's a transition from one level as a species into another, new world and new species. It's more than just a transition. It's what I would call a transformation, not only of the human physical body, the human biological sense, but it's a transition and a transformation of the soul. It's a growth process. It's a transcendent transformation that we are undergoing, and it's damned painful. It's like growing out of adolescence. And most of you, I'm sure, remember the pain of that. You look back and you think, good God, it's amazing I ever survived that. You look at your teenage kids and you think, oh God, how am I surviving this? Because that transcendent transformation is painful. And we're going through it on a planetary scale. The entire species is going through it. And the last 100 years has probably been, give or take, a few million gallons of blood. Probably one of the worst and most horrendous and bloody periods in human history. Those of you I know have studied most of your history. You know what's been going on since 1900. We're never going to have another century like that. The next one is going to be worse. But it won't be as bloody. It can't be as bloody. But in terms of shock to the whole psyche of the human species, it's going to be worse than World War II, or the Holocaust, or any of those events. We are in the middle of what I call the apocalypse. Now, let me divulge a moment and tell you what the word means. Now, I'm not trying to presume that some of you don't know. Some of you do, I'm sure, but the word has taken a meaning over the years, usually from our religious teachings. The apocalypse, it has a term of, the four horsemen, war, pestilence, whatever. What are the four horsemen? I can't remember. There you are, famine and pestilence, disease, war, whatever. Those four horsemen guys have been riding for 10,000 years. The history of the race is a bloody history. Now, that's not what the apocalypse means. I went to the big Oxford Dictionary, the kind that you can hardly lift, and I looked back at the meaning of the word, and I went through and I said, there's more to this than that. And you know what I found? The word apocalypse in the original ancient Greek means, let me get my glasses here. It's part of my new age. The discovery. What are we discovering? The uncovering. What are we uncovering? And the revealing. And what is being revealed? That's what the Greek word apocalypse means. Discovery, uncovering, and revealing. And you look around you and you're smack in the middle of it. You're discovering, you're learning, you're uncovering, and it's being revealed. And that is the apocalypse. And you've been in the middle of it now for as long as all of you have been here on this planet. And stop to think of what it really means. You're learning how you came to be here. You're learning who you really are. You're learning what you really are. And you're not going to take the shit from these people anymore, either from the churches or from Washington. You're not going to listen to these yo-yos. And you're not going to believe every damn word they say, because you know the minute their lips start moving, they're lying. And you're setting yourselves free, guys. And that's the beauty of this whole thing. And that's why I'm here and why I thank you for inviting me. And that's part of my venting my spleen. Thank you for that. Now, there's something else that's happening. And you're right smack in the middle of it. As I say, we're not merely bringing to a close a century or a millennium. Matter of fact, the calendar is so screwed up. Most of you should know this. I'll tell you if you don't, that Jesus of Galilee was born in 7 BC. Anyhow, the monk who put it together was probably imbibing too much wine. Monks tend to do that sometimes. They live such a shitty life. I don't blame them for drinking. Living without a woman around can be pretty horrendous sometimes. Yeah, you tell him, sweetheart. Thank you. Anyhow, the monk that put it together, I can't remember his name, but anyhow. Caesar was closer to the whole thing, but the church messed it up. Anyhow, Jesus was born roughly, well, we all know pretty accurately. The records are pretty clear. It's amazing the stuff the church tried to keep from you. He was born 7 BC, on the 1st of March, by the way. He was a Piscean. The first symbol he had was of the fish. Anyhow, we've reached the conclusion of a whole lot of things. The Brahma calendar, the Hindu calendar, the Kali Yuga of 5,000 years of timing that the Hindus in their long ancient history ended in 1897, which was just back a few years, not far. The Kali Yuga ended in 1897. The new age for the Hindus began in 1898. Interesting. The Aztec calendar stone, the zodiac, said Friday the 13th, 1999 was the end of the age as they compiled it. That was just a couple of years ago. The Mayan calendar says the 23rd of December in the year 2012 ends the current world age. And the Mayan says the world will come to an end. And it will. But the old planet ain't going to blow up. The age or the world that's coming to an end is the world we've had for the last 10,000 years. Thank God that's coming to an end. There's a new beginning for those of you who have the faith and the courage to address it. And you're a part of it. Nostradamus said that the 8th month, August of 1999, was the end of the old world. Now that's all interesting, coincide here with what? They coincide with the completion of a 26,000 year cycle, which has to do with astrology. Now, I will tell you that in my life I have learned that what we know of as astrology today is simply the remnants of a very ancient and very accurate science. Astrology is interesting because it's important, and it's important because it's accurate. And there are a few good astrologers out there who know how to read the times, the cycles. But we're reaching the end of an age. That's the thing that's making this whole thing different. It's not just the new millennium. We're concluding an age, and it's roughly going to end probably around 2012. It's a little hard to be terribly specific about it because there's something known as the precession of the equinoxes, which change things a bit. Anyhow, take my word for it. The experts, there are some guys out there who know quite a bit, say that it's the conclusion of the 26,000 year cycle. And what does that mean? That's the conclusion of the entire zodiac. Every sign of the zodiac has a period of 2,160 years. And you multiply those 12 by 2,160 and you get 25,900 and something. That's what's happening here. Our sun and our planet and our system of all 10 planets, and I'm including Nibiru in that, are about the Egyptians began to mark the zodiac. And I'm talking about pre-dynastic Egyptians. I'm talking about the guys who built the Sphinx and the guys who laid the groundwork for Egyptian science. We're going back to ancient Sumer and beyond. We're going back to ancient Anunnaki teachings. And they taught us a lot, which the church tried to keep from you. Did you know that they removed the book of Enoch from the Old Testament because they couldn't have you read that? Old Enoch was telling it like it is. They didn't want you to know that. Anyhow, you're reaching the end of this cycle. This is why this time in history, this time of being here is so damned important. You're concluding a complete age, and you're beginning a new one. And your new age is going to involve the human race and this tiny little planet back into that infinite cosmic world filled with life and intelligence. That's the most exciting part of all of it. And that's why I'm still excited. That's why I still get feisty and excited about what I'm doing, is because this is so damned important that you know who you are and what you are and why you're here now. Your being here is no accident. And I'm talking about being here this night in this auditorium. I'm talking about being on this planet at this time in history. You guys all came because you wanted to be here. You bought your tickets. You got yourself a front row seat. You're going to be present for the most incredible event in human history. And hold on tight, because it's going to be unlike anything you have ever seen before. And whether you like it or not, you're going to enjoy it. Now, that's what I think is happening. And that's why I think they're here, and that's why I think they've always been here. And I believe that the apocalypse is underway, and I believe we are turning into a new species on what I call a sacred planet, in a sacred universe, which is a completely living system. We are undergoing a transformation, a transcendent transformation. And in 100 years, the human race is going to be as different from what we are today as what we are from old Neanderthal or Australopithecus. That big a difference. Now, what time is it? It's a little after 9. Am I okay here on time? Okay. A lot of times I get on these little binges here and I start babbling and they throw me out. Well, you can throw me out, but you're going to have to shut me up.
Tell us about the Pope.
Pull the plug. Oh, thank you for reminding me. Anyhow, when the Anunnaki first came here, and God knows how long ago that was, there are estimates, according to Sitchin, that it was 200,000 years ago, maybe, when they first began to putter in our domestic genetic makeup. The creation of man has been a long process. As I told you, it hasn't stopped. It's still underway, and that's one of the biggest things about what's happening now with the abduction thing, is that genetic manipulation is still underway. But you guys are having a hand in that yourselves. What you're using here, your mind and your brain are bringing about changes in your physical structure that you're doing out of the power of reason and the power of your soul that biology doesn't even begin to understand. Because you are an immortal soul with tremendous power, and you're changing yourselves by what you do. Anyhow, let's get back to the Pope briefly. Bless his heart, he thinks well, or he tries well. Poor old man, I keep thinking he's going to keel over any day. And this last release from the Vatican about the third secret of Fatima, excuse me, ladies and gentlemen, that's bullshit. I don't know how else to say it. They didn't release the story. The story has been seen by a number of people, and a few of them have had the courage to speak out about it. And a Jesuit priest by the name of Malachi Martin just passed away recently. He was a tremendous man, a great hero, a beautiful soul. Malachi had the privilege of seeing the secret, the complete story. And he says it was frightening, it was horrendous. It involves a number of apparently geologic things on the planet, cataclysmic kind of things that are due to happen. We've all known that we're on the edge of it anyhow. It's a cycle process. It's cyclic. The volcanoes, the earthquakes, the landslides, poor Costa Rica, you know, this happens all the time. There are floods in Bangladesh that kill 200,000 people at once. This is a loss of life that we just can't even begin to grasp. Anyhow, Malachi says that's part of it. The other part is that they cannot tell you that in the secret, the beautiful lady of Fatima said that at the end of this age, other of God's children from the stars will come, and the church will collapse. And that's why some of the great prophets have said there's only, what, 2 more popes, maybe 3, after this old man. Maybe 2, who knows? Anyhow, it's the end of the age. Other children of God from the stars will be coming, and they're here. Now, where did these children from the stars come in the first place? From, let's say, Nibiru, the 12th planet, which astronomers have called the 10th planet, Planet X. The Naval Observatory knew this 20 years ago. Robert Harrington, the chief astronomer at the Naval Observatory, told Sitchin, he says, you know, we're so certain of it, all we need to do is name it. And Zechariah says it's already been named. The Sumerians named it. And the Anunnaki named it. And he says to Harrington, you should put it in your catalogs as Nibiru. Anyhow, they spotted it. It's been photographed. An Argentine photographer at an observatory in Argentina, in the southern hemisphere, has gotten a picture of Nibiru. And it apparently is on its way back after its 3,600-year cycle. The last pass it made was in 1600 BC, and an entire Minoan civilization came to an end because a volcano named Santorini blew up in the Mediterranean and brought the end of the Minoan, Cretan Minoan civilization. Well, old Nibiru is on its another pass. So we expect there will be some interesting geologic changes on the planet when this planet, 2.5 times the size of the Earth, gets within the inner part of our system. Now, depending on whether it's on one side of the sun when we're on this side, or we and it is on the same side at the same time, the degree of response and reaction will be different. If we're on the same side of the sun at the same time, we're in for one hell of a ride. That's probably what the prophecy is about. Not only the end of the church, but some pretty major changes on the planet. We're talking about tidal waves a mile high. My son lives in Norfolk, Virginia. Got to have him move to Colorado. Anyhow, that's what I think is taking place. And what happened is recently I got into an item in the New York Times. My kid bought me this as a birthday gift, a subscription to the Times. In Phoenix, we don't have much of the way of a newspaper. That's all I'll say about it. It's this thick, and it's mostly wheels, sports, and property. But that's what they think in Phoenix. Anyhow, I read in the New York Times. I go through it, enjoy it, read my coffee, smoke my cigars, read my coffee. You know, I'm really wrapping it up here. Drink my coffee, read the paper, and smoke my stogies. Little item here. His Holiness is planning, now get the words here. Get these words. He's planning a pilgrimage to the holy city of Ur. Now, Ur is in Iraq, and there ain't nothing there at the moment except a pile of mud and ruins. And what's left of an old ziggurat that was built God knows how many thousands of years ago, which the Iraqis have been trying to rebuild. His Holiness wants to make, before he dies, a pilgrimage to the holy city of Ur. And I'm reading into that something that maybe I shouldn't. But I know the Vatican is aware of Nibiru. Monsignor Corrado Balducci, who is a spokesperson, has been for a number of years for the Holy See, who has been speaking out rather bluntly about the reality of UFOs and the reality of extraterrestrial intelligence, who said recently that His Holiness looks upon the extraterrestrials as other children of God, and that we in the Vatican have known about them for a long time. Well, apparently the Vatican, who recently spent $100 million building a telescope on top of a mountain in Arizona, where we had to violate all of our environmental laws. We had to protect the spotted owl, and the Indians called it a holy place. The hell with that. We gave it to the Vatican, and they built an observatory. Now, what is they are interested in having an observatory? Well, this guy in Argentina apparently got a photograph of it, and it is golden in color, interestingly enough. And there is another story there, which I don't have time to get into tonight, but read your Sitchin. I think the old man wants to go and get right with the guys upstairs. And I'm not talking about God. I'm talking about the Anunnaki, who are going to come back in a big way and say, what the hell have you guys done with what we tried to do here? Look at this mess. I think the guy from Galilee is going to say the same thing. What the hell have you done with what I left you? Who made this mess? Clean this mess up. Anyhow, that's what I think is happening. Now, there's a young man at University of Atlanta. A man I like and respect, a young man named Courtney Brown, who's written a couple of books on remote viewing, and I've done a little of that myself. I spent, as you know, most of my life in the Army, and the Army was remote viewing a long time ago. And you guys yourselves do it without even realizing it. You've been doing it. You can do it. It's part of your nature. You can do it. Anyhow, Courtney made a comment not long ago, which I scribbled here and I wanted to share with you. And he said, is it worth it to publicly confront a society with ideas for which they are so poorly prepared? Is it worth the public scorn, the professional ostracism, the financial risk, and the personal pain? And he was asking himself this. He put it into one of his books because he's been under a lot of attacks. And I thought of it myself because I've asked myself that same question. And I will say to you tonight, you damn right it's worth it. And the only reason I say that is because of people like you. Now let's take a short break. I have to visit the gentleman's lounge. And I want time for my slide presentation. I've got a few things to show you that I think you will be interested in. Are we doing okay on time, Don? Thank you. I'm not going to dwell on these slides because I'm concerned about the time. I also wanted to have time to have a little exchange with you guys a little later because some questions and answers I appreciate because I learn a lot from people like you. So let's get along here. This is the slideshow you're about to see is only a fragment of what I used to have. Most of my stuff was stolen during the divorce. And the only complete slideshow is included in that video that I'm trying to sell here tonight called The Greatest Story Never Told. That's got most of my original slides in it. So what you're seeing tonight is simply a fragment of that original set, plus a few I've added to it. I keep getting things from time to time from people who are still messing around on the fringes of this greatest secret never told. And people like Norman Bergman, who's brilliant, who's written an incredible book. Anyhow, let's move along. I like to open with a picture like this. And I explain to people why, because to me this not only is an absolutely beautiful photo, but it represents for me the universe, the living being, the universe that we live in, that's part of our nature. There is where we came from. We are starseed. And I love the layout, these stars. And then I'll tell you that in this picture, not all of these little dots of light are stars. A lot of them are other galaxies. And we've only learned some of this in the last 30, 40 years. What an incredibly immense cosmos that we live in. But I like meditating on something like this. I look at that one and I think, my God. I remember the old remark Job made years ago, and I think it's in the Old Testament. Yeah. What is man that thou art mindful of him? And you look at that and you realize that that living universe is filled with intelligence and life. I think it's inspiring. It, to me, represents home. This is a galaxy very much like the one we live in, and I show it to people because it's a good representation of our own home galaxy. This is the Great Spiral Nebula in Andromeda, and if we were far enough away from our own galaxy to look back and see it in that form, the human race, the planet Earth, and our little tiny solar system is way out here in the suburbs. And what I like to do is let my mind go once in a while and try to imagine what life is like back here in the big city. But this is a galaxy. The latest estimate from NASA, with the genius of NASA, they made an estimate roughly that there are 400 billion stars in our galaxy, which is shaped very much like that. They've estimated there are 400 billion galaxies in the known universe. And that is in the universe we live in. And if Kaku is right, and that there's a different universe for every dimension, we're talking about lots and lots of room. Infinity, which most humans can't even begin to grasp. Anyhow, these pictures kind of set the stage. Oh, what did I do? Screw this up, it's backwards. Anyhow, that doesn't change what's in the picture. This is a picture taken by Apollo 13. Remember the guys that barely got back? Famous movie was made about them. They had an explosion. They barely made it to the moon and went in orbit, came back. Anyhow, it was close. Anyhow, they took a lot of pictures on the way around the moon, on the way to moon, around it, coming back from it. I'll show you some of those. This object here has been estimated at about 5 miles long. It's an artificial object, self-luminous, as is this one and that one. Here's the moon. They haven't gotten too far either from the planet when this was taken. Apparently they were monitored all the way there and all the way back. And I've had a nagging suspicion that these dudes had a hand in the explosion. Because there's a recurrent rumor that Apollo 13 planned to place and detonate a small nuclear device on the surface of the moon. Now, if that's true, I fully understand why they didn't make it. I can understand the explosion. I understand also the concern that these guys followed them all the way around and all the way back. This thing is supposed to be 5 miles in length. Now that's a pretty good size object. This is the negative, this is the positive. It's self-luminous, it's obviously artificial, and it looks like what jokingly is referred to as a big mother. You know, the mothership that carries the discs or whatever. If that thing is 5 miles long, it can carry a lot of little discs. It appears to have artificiality about it, like many of Norman Berggren's photographs near Saturn from the Voyager. Now, whoever can put an artificial, self-luminous piece of equipment out there in our space near our moon, around our planet, that's that big, has got some pretty damn fine technology. Another picture. Here we have the Big Mother over here. These are the two objects. These two photos were in sequence, one right after the other. The guys on Apollo 13 never talked about any of this because they've been flat-ass told that they're deep shit if they would. And most of them are military or ex-military like I am. And we're facing, when you've ever had a top secret clearance, you face basically life in prison. If they're really kind to you, only 20 years. But they take all your pay and allowances and retirement and benefits or whatever, put you in jail for 10 years. So learn to keep your mouth shut. I kept mine shut for 27 years. Actually, I kept it shut a lot longer than that. Here we are. This is not unlike pictures taken by the famous or infamous George Adamski many years ago. A lot of people used to make fun of George, saying he made it all up and photos were phony. But he took some pictures that are strangely accurate compared to pictures that have been taken over the last few years. This is a pretty good sized job here. I can just imagine in 5 miles, all kinds of stuff going on in there. Conning towers, control towers, maintenance, there's probably a soccer ball court and, maybe a swimming pool and all kinds of good things there. With this kind of technology, guys, they can have pretty much everything they want. A lot of our military, a lot of our political people for years kept thinking they're here to take us over. They're here to invade us. They're going to steal our treasures. Well, we only have 2 treasures. Our mind and our soul. And of course, our genetics. We are a gold mine of genetics. But they made it so. And they are taking samples from us. And they're using some samples from us, and probably they're manipulating other species, other places. Anyhow, you can just imagine what goes on a ship that size. Now, this is one of Norman Berggren's pictures. This is the rings of Saturn. And there are several of them. There are about 5 major rings. Looking at them from a small photograph, it looks like one big bunch of rings. But this object is roughly almost the size of our moon. It's artificial, self-luminous, and it moves around. And it was photographed by Voyager 1. And people in NASA have known about these things for years and never talked about it. And Norman had to put it together and print the photographs himself long after he retired. Now, artificial, size of our moon, self-luminous, and it moves all over the place. It's found here and there. It moves in the rings, beyond the rings. It's in orbit around Saturn. Now, there's a lot of going on Saturn, or around Saturn. Berggren thinks they're making the rings. I think they're mining the rings. I told him that. I said, I'm an amateur. I don't know these things, but I suspect they're mining the rings. Anyhow, here's another one. Here are the rings. This is an object. This is an artificial object, a constructed object that's 2,000 miles long. Here is another object that is self-luminous and that moves around. Norman says this is the emission of a power system. He says this is an incredibly powerful electromagnetic vehicle. Well, I think what we're looking at here, this and this, are demonstrations and manifestations, as are these, or this, of what Michio Kaku calls a stage one civilization. Now, if you've read any of his work, you know, he and physicists and astronomers theorize that there are probably about 5 stages of civilized development in the universe. The planet Earth is stage 00. We ain't barely got started yet. Stage 1 is a civilization that can control generally all the power within their system. Their planet, the sun, everything within that system. A stage 2 is a culture and civilization that control and utilize the power within a galaxy. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's right. Stage 1 controls the power, taps the power within a solar system. Stage 2 taps the power within a galaxy. He surmises there may be stage 3 and 4 beyond that, which possibly would be multidimensional intelligences who are so advanced that we look upon them as gods. Anyhow, I find Norman's book a masterpiece. I credit the little dude for having the courage to print it. He had it printed in England because he couldn't get it printed in this country. But this thing is 2,000 miles long. And I pointed out to him that it looks to me like this is part of the ring that they've already mined. And he says, no, this is part of the ring that they're in the process of making. But again, I bow to his expertise. I don't know that he and I, either one, know the truth in the matter. Well, this is a photograph taken by Apollo 14, near the moon. Here's the object they photographed. Here's a picture of a crater. This is the object. These guys are in orbit around the moon, and they saw this thing, and they snapped a picture. Snapped another picture. This thing was moving along rather smartly, by the way. Apollo 14 said they never saw a thing. Here's another picture taken by Apollo 12. These guys just simply won't talk. Armstrong talks to friends privately. He's been known to talk at dinners when he's had a drink or two. He talks to people he trusts. Some of those people quote him. When they got back from the moon, 2 things happened. One, they had the parade, they all the hoop-de-doo and all that crap. Armstrong left NASA, abruptly walked away, went back to Cincinnati, started teaching mathematics at the university there. He separated himself from the NASA space program completely. Question is why? Now, another interesting thing happened. Buzz Aldrin, when he got back from the moon, within about 6 weeks after the parades and all the rest was over, was placed in an alcoholic rehabilitation hospital. And he was kept incognito for 2 months. And they had the guts to say that Aldrin was an alcoholic. Now, can you imagine NASA sending an alcoholic to the moon? People who knew Aldrin said that when he got out of the alcoholic rehabilitation ward, he was never the same man. He was asked once, Buzz, what the hell did you really see up there? And he started to cry. Anyhow, this was taken by 12. Armstrong and Aldrin were 11. Here's another picture. Interesting object taken near the moon, moving along rather smartly from left to right. No one ever talked about it. The photo is available, you can get it, but you gotta write and you gotta list the negative and you gotta list the roll number and you gotta wait like hell for them to get around to filling it. And if you prod them in 6 months, maybe they'll let you have the photo. Can you remind them that your tax money paid for the damn thing? Well, people have done that. I've shared these with a lot of guys who've written and gotten their photos. And they're exactly the same picture. Here's another one, Apollo 12. This is something that was a fairly good size. These appear to be jet emissions of some kind. These are lights. These appear to be something like windows. This was a pretty good size object near the moon. They don't talk about it. The next is a series that's kind of rare. I'm one of the few, I think, who has the whole set. It's a series of photos taken by an Army sergeant at Fort Belvoir in the 50s. These guys were out on a training mission of some kind. They were taking a break under a tree, and they looked up, and the sergeant happened to have a camera with him, and they looked up over this military-style building here at Fort Belvoir, and they saw this thing in the sky. And a couple guys says, "What the hell is that?" And it seemed to be coming toward them. He took another picture. Here's some telephone lines here, tree. And it came closer. And then they noticed as they were sitting there watching it, it was beginning to turn itself into a cloud. And I have a few photographs of some interesting clouds to show you. I like talking about clouds. Because there are clouds in them, there are clouds. So this object, I think, is demonstrating on purpose in front of these guys, all of them, 10 or 15 of them sitting on the ground. They probably knew they had a camera, and this bunch up here, whoever's behind this, is putting on a show. And it's turning into a cloud. And then the cloud flew away at a rather high rate of speed. I share that with you because I want to point out to you, don't ever look at clouds the same way again. Was it Joni Mitchell in her famous song, "I looked at clouds from both sides now"? Well, you do the same, because there are clouds up there that ain't clouds. This is a picture taken in Denmark 10 years later of the same kind of thing, a ring that turned itself into a cloud. In color, in front of a bunch of Danes. Another demonstration. These guys they have fun doing this. They used to demonstrate things to our Air Force hot jet pilots in Europe years ago. Gordon Cooper refers to it in his book. When he was flying F-86s over Europe in the 50s, he said they used to show off around us and scare the hell out of us and fly rings around us. Well, they like making these statements. There's a cloud with a beam of light coming down. This was in France, near Paris. Now this is an interesting cloud. What kind of a cloud has a beam of light coming down? Well, we have some more. This cloud is near Holloman Air Force Base, and it's moving smartly from left to right, leaving a bit of a trail behind it. And the guy driving along the highway saw it, and holy shit, stopped the car and took a picture. And this thing moved smartly out of sight. Another cloud. I think this was taken in Japan. You can see there's a vapor trail behind it. But that cloud's moving along. This is another one taken over the Caribbean. This cloud was all by itself. Look at the flat end of it here. Now what's in here? It's roughly 2 miles long. Well, remember the pictures taken by Apollo 13 was 5 miles long. This was taken over Wanakee Reservoir years and years ago. There were roughly 300 people watching. It hovered over a frozen reservoir in New Jersey. It attracted a crowd of people. The highway was jammed. Police showed up. So a couple of hundred people, including cops, watched this thing for about 45 minutes. It beamed this light down on the frozen surface of Wanakee Reservoir. When the thing flew away, the surface had a perfectly circular melted place in the middle of the reservoir. Now what the object was doing, taking on water, who knows. Anyhow, a lot of witnesses. No answers from the authorities. The famous Lord Shield Pakal sarcophagus lid, which I think almost all of you are familiar with. The guys at NASA at Houston said, it was a guy named, I forget his name, an engineer, technical engineer. Houston says, "Good God, this guy's sitting inside of a ramjet. He's got his hands on the controls, he's got his eyes to the eyepiece, he's got his feet on the pedals, there's jet fire coming out of the back, and two intakes in front." This was done 900 years ago. Now, according to Maya, had buried this dude, and he was listed as one of their great priest kings, Lord Shield Pakal. When they got inside the tomb, they found out that the skeleton was of a man well over 6 feet tall. The Mayans are basically little dudes about 5 feet or so. Anyhow, Blumerick is the name of the scientist at NASA. A guy named Blumerick. He says, "That's a ramjet. I don't care what the hell you call it." The archaeologists call it the corn god rising or something. Some stupid thing. Here's another Mayan carving of a guy sitting inside. If you turn this thing on its side, here is a domed disc with a cupola on top and flames coming out of the bottom of it, and inside is some dude sitting in there looking out. Well, the Mayans were very colorful in their artwork. This is the way they represented it, but it's pretty clear. This is the famous little golden airplane from Columbia. I've been a member of the Ancient Astronaut Society for many years. Matter of fact, my membership card is 101. That's how long I've been with them. They use this as a little model device. Now, the original, and there's several of them, are in the museum in Bogota, I believe. But it's solid gold, and they looked at it and says it's a perfect aerodynamic representation of a jet. Cockpit, wings, ailerons, stabilizers, it's all there. So recently, during one of their major conferences, I think in Europe, one of the Ancient Astronaut members, who was an engineer, built one to scale. I mean, he built the same thing, but roughly about 2 feet, 2.5 feet long. But he followed this pattern perfectly, put a little motor in it, and flew it all over in the skies successfully for the members at one of their annual conventions. I think they held that one in Zurich. But this is estimated to be at least 1,000 years old. This is a famous cave painting from Mongolia. When the archaeologists first found it, they swore up and down it had to be a fake, a hoax. Then they started doing some research with the pigment and did some carbon dating and found out the damn thing must have been at least 1,500 years old. It was painted there. It was in a cave near Fergana along the Chinese-Mongolian border. But it's of interest to me because of this object the guy is holding, the glove he's wearing, the faceplate or the big globed helmet with the devices here, which I think are part of the breathing or speaking devices, and then the distortion from the plexiglass or the glass. The little guy who did the carving on the painting probably wasn't sure what the hell he was looking at, but he was a pretty good artist, and I point out to this little dude here, the artist was pretty good. And what's that there? And what's this doing in a cave painted 1,500 years ago? It's what Ivan Sanderson used to call, and I'm amused by the term, he called them ooparts, out-of-place artifacts. And archaeologists would rather die than discuss them. This is a cave painting in southern France near the Spanish border that's been estimated to be 20,000 years. But whoever they were damn fine artists. Look at this wild boar, look like a mastodon. God knows what some of these are. Early horses, the goat. Fascinating. Fairly good art, but look at these things, this one, and these up here, and over here. What is the artist trying to communicate? Well, here's a blow-up of some of them. Leroy Goret, a French researcher, put these in a catalog. He was fascinated by them, and this one particularly. An object shaped just like this was seen over Mexico City within 2 years ago. And the artist, 20,000 years ago, was trying to make it clear that this thing was moving. And I think he did a pretty good job. Now, this is how long this thing goes on. 20,000 years. Now, we're talking about old-time Anunnaki. Now, this is more modern. This is a painting that was done in 1710 by a Flemish artist. This painting hangs on the wall of the library at Cambridge University in England. It was intriguing to me, first of all, because it's supposed to represent an event in the life of the young man from Galilee. It's supposed to be the anointment, the baptism of Jesus by John, his cousin. And there's a story there that hasn't been told. Anyhow, this is the baptism scene. This Flemish artist is painting it. What's this? And why did the artist in 1710 put this above this scene, with apparently rays of light coming down? What did he know in 1710? Well, I ask for forgiveness for this. This is the color of the thing, and it slips around. Anyhow, this is what it's like. This is what it's like in color, and I'm sorry. Forgive me, these things happen. There's a picture taken 15 years ago in Brazil. And I want you to look at that object. And then let's go back. Now, why are these objects showing up in religious paintings, particularly involving the life of the young rabbi from Galilee? Oh, I'm moving the wrong way here. Well, am I being too subtle for you? In my opinion, there is a strong, obvious connection between these things, these guys, and that young man from Galilee. This is a fresco on a wall in Yugoslavia, of all places, Kosovo. We know what heartbreaking events had just happened in Kosovo not long ago. But on the wall of this medieval church in Yugoslavia is an interesting scene. This is a scene involving the life of Jesus of Galilee. But what's this in the sky? And who's sitting inside with his hands obviously on some controls? And what is a medieval painter putting this in a religious fresco in the 11th or 12th century on a church? What is he trying to communicate? Here's another one. This is a tapestry. This is 13th century France. What's this? This is back before the French, whatever their names, those brothers were, started flying balloons in 17-something. This is 13th century France, and this thing in the sky, and look at this old man up here with the beard, bringing his hands up, staring at this. And what are these objects in the sky? And this is a religious painting. This is involving the life of Jesus. Or it's a religious tapestry. This is an Italian masterpiece. Renaissance, filled with lenticular clouds. But some of them are different kinds of clouds. Oh yes, not archaeologists, but meteorologists will tell you lenticular clouds are very common. Sure they are. But then there are lenticular clouds, and then there are lenticular clouds. Now, some lenticular clouds, particularly in Renaissance and medieval paintings, happen to have domes on top and windows. Now, what is the artist communicating? Hey, look at this. And this. But it gets better. Here's one here. This is a scene from the Crucifixion. This is a late medieval, early Renaissance painting. But look at this thing. It's obviously moving. The artist here is conveying the movement just like the guy who did the cave painting 20,000 years before, putting little movement and dots behind. Here's a domed disc at the Crucifixion. Ah, look at this one. And these. Some are more obvious than others. Another scene from the life of the man. This is another baptism scene. These two guys were cousins, by the way, and there's another whole story there, which we don't have time to get into. Now, this is an entire squadron of lenticular clouds. This is the Pope. This is another 13th, 14th century Italian masterpiece. They're looking at all this strange snow on the ground, which appeared in the middle of summer. Now, what is the artist putting all of this? This is entire squadrons. This is a flotilla of lenticular clouds. And look who's up here. These guys were pretty clear, and they were damned obvious. Now, this is another beautiful one. This is supposed to be the Annunciation. That's when Mary, the mother of Jesus, was told that she's pregnant. This is a late Renaissance painting, and here's Mary in here praying. And there's a beam of light going from the top of her head up through the window, up here to a circular domed disc with windows. And when you look at the painting in detail, there are little cherubs' faces looking out of the windows. Now, this is the Annunciation, when she was told by Gabriel that she was going to be pregnant, or that she was pregnant. But what is this scene of this little domed disc up here with windows and little faces peering out of the windows? This is a Renaissance painting from about the 14th century, representing a religious scene of the Annunciation. Ah, this is one of the better ones. This is a famous Italian master, Fra Filippo Lippi. He was a churchman, he was a friar, he was a great painter. This is John and Jesus playing together. Here's their mother. Here's Jesus' mother. But what's this in the sky over Mary's shoulder? And what's this guy down here in the blow-up? Little dude looking up, and a dog beside him barking, looking up at this object in the sky. Now, Filippo Lippi put this in a deeply religious, very tender, beautiful masterpiece painting that hangs in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. But what is Lippi communicating? And this thing is so interesting to me because it's almost a dead ringer for the one seen by the Reverend Gill in New Guinea at a famous incident in UFO history. Bonai, New Guinea, a number of years ago, were about 30 or 40 people in the mission school. Reverend Gill was an Anglican priest who was head master at this mission school in Bonai, New Guinea. And one day a bunch of the young students came running in and said, "Father Gill, you've got to come out. There's something hovering over the beach. It's interesting." And Father Gill ran out, and several of the instructors ran out, and about 25 or 30 of the kids ran out. I say kids, they ran in age from 10 up to 20. And they looked up in the sky over the beach, and they saw this circular metallic object hovering there. And they said that there were people walking around a deck on this thing, and this thing hovered over there, over the beach for about an hour. Well, they stood there with their mouths hanging open. The kids got excited. They jumped up and down, waved their arms, yelled. And in a few minutes, the guys walking around on the deck of this thing looked over the side and they waved back. Then they went about their business, or whatever it was, and this thing went and was gone. But descriptions and sketches by Reverend Gill and the other instructors at the times described the thing as very much like this. There was light coming out of it, there was a superstructure up there, and there were humans walking around on it. Now this is a famous case. Anyhow, I don't know how many of you have ever seen it again or before, but this Lippi painting, Fra Filippo Lippi. The old man looking up, shielding his eyes, dog barking. They're obviously aware of this thing, but what's it doing over the shoulder of a Madonna in a deeply sensitive religious painting? Well, here's another one. Another church in Yugoslavia, a fresco, crucifixion. Up here, two domed discs with apparently, this is blow-ups down here, apparently lights or something, smoke or some coming out of them, and two faces inside. That's a human face in there, and a human face over here. And these things are on a medieval tapestry, or medieval fresco in Yugoslavia, about 11th century, 10th or 11th century. Hard to tell with frescoes. You have to flake paint off, and it's rather difficult getting a dating on them. Anyhow, this is a medieval church, a Serbian church, by the way. But look at this. These are very clearly domed discs with faces in them, and the scene is the crucifixion. This is another one that I like. This is Moses receiving the Ten Commandments. Now, this is a painting that's more recent. This is Baroque. This is early 17th century. This painting shows Moses receiving the Ten Commandments, and in the sky up here are domed discs. I was amused one day reading the Qumran material, the Dead Sea Scrolls. There is a reference in there to chariots of glory that are seen in the skies that are being operated by God's angels. Chariots of glory. Well, the chariots of glory, this painter is putting them in the sky over the Ten Commandments. Not very subtle. Pretty blunt. This is a tapestry, medieval. Lovely ladies here. And this is a scene, by the way, from the life of Jesus. But what's this hovering over the church? It's a domed disc. And it's about as clear as it can be. Now, what is that master tapestry maker putting that in there for? This is a famous one. This is a little ceramic object that Zecharia Sitchin found hidden on a back shelf in the Ancient Museum of Man in Istanbul, Turkey. And Zechariah looked at it, and knowing what he knows, he says, "Good God, why don't you put this out for the people to look at?" The museum director, who knew Zechariah, says, "Zechariah, we don't know how to label it. We don't know what it is. We've estimated its age from where it was dug up about 7,000 years. But he says, we don't know how to what kind of put on it, What do we say? And he says, you and I both know, Zechariah, that things like this didn't exist 7,000 years ago. And Zechariah just grinned. Well, he persevered and he prevailed. And the director finally put it out. And this is a photograph of it. And the only thing missing is the head of the astronaut. He's got boots. He's got a flexible spacesuit. He's sitting at the controls of something, and at the rear end of this thing are thrusters that are almost identical to the thrusters on the back of our space shuttles. 3 of them. This is where the head was knocked off here. But you can see from this drawing, which is pretty clear, this is streamlined. It's a machine of some kind. He's sitting in a padded seat. He's got on boots and he's got gloves. No, excuse me. And finally, Zechariah had him move it out. It's on display now in the museum at Istanbul, with 3 thrusters on the back. And the director says, we both know, don't we, that these things didn't exist 7,000 years ago. Now, people have asked me what I think it is. And here's what I think it is. This is an object that was made about 30, 40 years ago. It's a child's toy. And I was amused by the similarity between this and this. And I think this was probably the same thing this is, a child's toy. Now these are little figures from what's north of Bolivia. I lose my track sometimes. Ecuador, thank you. This is what's known as a senior moment. I got so damn much in there that I can't remember all of it. Anyhow, thank you, Ecuador. Dug up in Ecuador by an archaeologist who didn't know what the hell it was. All we know is that the estimated age was probably 800 or 900 years. But the Indian who made it was pretty damn good at explaining or showing what he had seen. Look at this apparatus, Probably this is an oxygen tank or faceplate. It's the spacesuit, flexible legs, very much like the early Soviet spacesuits. Here's another one, same basic time, a different figure, probably made by the same artist. Look at these legs, boots, handles, or mittens, all of the objects here, the control objects, the faceplate again. What is an Indian making this 900 years ago trying to communicate? It's something he has seen. And 900 years ago, these guys had spacesuits, probably very much like the early Soviets, which were very much like this, flexible, which interestingly enough, go back to this, which is 7,000 years old. Anyhow, there's a story here, the greatest story that's never been told. This was not discovered no more than 10 or 12 years ago in Egypt at Abydos. Many of you have seen it. This is in one of Eric von Daniken's books. Eric got all excited when he first saw this. It's found on the underside of a monolithic slab of stone at Abydos, and apparently it had been originally covered by plaster. And the Egyptians had covered it in plaster and then painted Egyptian paintings on top of the plaster. But this thing obviously predates the Egyptians by a long, long time. And Eric got all excited about it and says, "Mein Gott, das ist ein Helikopter. Das ist ein Panzer. Das ist ein U-Boot." Boot, as the Germans call it, U-Boot. But this is totally un-Egyptian. These are not hieroglyphs. What are these objects? And what are they doing on this monolithic slab of stone that was placed into the temple that was built for Seti I, who was the father of Ramses the Great? Here's a color photograph of it. You can see ein Helikopter. Das Panzer. U-Boot. Eric got all excited about it. Zahi Hawass won't even talk about it. You all know who Zahi Hawass is. He's the Egyptian yeah, well, I wouldn't buy any real estate from him. He's a political appointee. He's a nice enough guy. He's very charming. The ladies love him. But he's in charge of the Giza Plateau. And all of the research done with the Sphinx and the pyramids, he's sitting on top of. He won't even let them talk about what they discovered was inside the Red Pyramid. Now, I don't know whether any of you heard this or not, but they discovered a fresco that only shows up under infrared. That's in the Red Pyramid, which was completely encircled by an army base for 30 years. And they finally tore the fences down, and now archaeologists are going in and out of it, but someone, just by accident, took a photo of this wall, and the picture came out in infrared. But you can't see it without the infrared. Now, this goes back a long time. The Red Pyramid is probably older than the Step Pyramid at Saqqara. Creatures, figures. But I haven't seen a picture. All I've heard is a description of it by people who saw it in the film. But trying to get Zahi Hawass to talk about it, it's not easy. Let's move along. This is a famous Soviet picture taken by their Phobos moon launch while it was in orbit over the surface of Mars. And this is a picture taken looking down on the surface of Mars. And the camera picked up this shadow of something that was in the sky. This is only a shadow on the surface. But interestingly enough, the shape interested the Soviets. And they grinned. And they didn't know what to make of it. And they were very hesitant to say UFO. Anyhow, this is another picture taken by the Soviets. The Germans reprinted this, and they call it a colony on Mars. This showed up in the infrared, and this facility is underground. And it's the size of a city like Chicago. And in the infrared, you can see the streets, the blocks, the very orderly layout that represents intelligence. And apparently, from the heat generated by this that shows up on the infrared, this is an active, ongoing facility. And as Zechariah says, what makes you think they ever left? He said very flatly one time that they've reactivated their Mars base. So there's a lot of activity going on. And this is apparently a city-sized facility under the surface of Mars. The old Courtney says he's been there. Well, he's, a lot of people don't take his work too seriously, but I do. I've done some remote viewing. First time I did any of it, it scared the hell out of me. It works. A retired Army officer by the name of Skip Atwater, who was a remote viewer, was Project Stargate for many, many years. Interestingly enough, Atwater is now running the Robert Monroe Institute in Virginia. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of Robert Monroe and the work that he did, but what is a retired Army officer running the Monroe Institute, who was trained in the Institute to be a remote viewer? He's teaching. But your Army is there, you can be damn sure. And don't believe any of the whoop-de-doo about the fact that they don't keep Stargate going anymore. They closed it down in one place and opened it up again in another place, and it's still at Fort Meade, and it's still run by the NSA, not the Army. And by the way, you guys, the NSA is probably the most powerful and scary and biggest security organization in the world. They are frightening. They own a big chunk of the Middle Australia called Pine Gap. They own a big chunk in Yorkshire in England called Menwith Hill. And most of the facilities are underground and American flags are flying and we run the damn place. But remind me to tell you before I'm finished about... I talked to you, didn't I, about the UKUSA? UK, USA?
Yeah.
I didn't? Okay, well, I'll touch upon it, but remind me. A pact that was signed back in '47, interestingly enough. Anyhow, this is an underground facility which is quite active because the heat generated is considerable. This is another facility that's on the surface of Mars. Now, I jokingly say this is a rocket dome or an airdrome. This is a parking lot. This is an admin building here. These are the launch or where the ships and planes come in or whatever. Probably there are cafeterias in here, souvenir shops, whatever you find when you go to a big airport. Now this is on the surface. Here's obviously a road coming to it. But look at this. This is obviously artificial structure, and this is a gigantic object. This is a couple of miles across on the surface. Now, NASA won't even talk about it. This is a famous thing. I talked to you about the cycle of time and what was happening. This is a famous Mayan glyph, and it was their wheel of time. And they used it to demonstrate the fact of the process of the 12 signs in the 26,000 years. Now, the Mayans were a hell of damn fine mathematicians and astronomers. Archaeologists say they couldn't be because they hadn't invented the lens. Well, how did the hell the Mayans know about all the planets in the solar system? And they even named them. Anyhow, this is a Mayan wheel of time. And you can notice how, look at the meshing of the grills. It's almost like an intricate, an astronomical engineering device. And this was done by the Mayans 1,000 years ago. I forget what the engineers call gears like this. I'm sorry? Well, they're all connected together. I mean, the movement of each one affects all the others. It's like a watchmaker's incredible watch. Well, the Mayans knew a lot of things. So did the Sumerians. Here's one of the Sumerian gods. They said at the end of the cycle that Shamash, one of their great Anunnaki gods, was going to come back and he was going to harvest and pluck the fruit from the plants that they had planted. Now here is Shamash plucking and harvesting the fruit. Now I find that intriguing because we're at the end of the age, and what are the fruits? I mean, forgive the term. I never did like that term. I don't like, I remember the day when I was a kid, fruit meant grapefruit, oranges, apples. Anyhow. Well, I will have to remind you of something that's kind of sobering. The carpenter from Galilee talked about it. He talked about the good grain that was planted and the good grain that will be harvested. And he talked about the return of the landowner. Remember the analogy or the old legend about the guy comes back after having been away for years and asks his foreman and all, "What have you done with what I left you?" Jesus of Nazareth talked about the harvest. And here's Shamash harvesting the fruit. I think we're the fruit. Here is a painting of by a religious friend of mine in Italy, a talented young man who said basically the same thing. These guys are sifting. They're throwing away, culling, and they're putting other things in this bag and carrying them away. They're discarding these other bad grain, and they're taking the good seed. I like that. I don't necessarily hold to this apocalyptic answer, but I think there's a lot of truth here. I think that we're going to be looking at this reality very soon, and it's going to be pretty damned important when it starts to go down. Forgive me for this. I have to include a little humor here. I think we have to laugh not only at our condition, but the situation. And this has to do with why don't they stick around, or why don't they stay? What is it? I can't read it from here. Would you stay at the zoo? Here's another one after the recent discovery of more water on Mars. He says, "I'll check. No, the swimming pool is empty." Well, looking at that underground city on Mars that the Soviets photographed, I can understand there are probably swimming pools down there. These guys know how to entertain themselves. And forgive me for this, I couldn't resist this. This is a UFO debunker at work. I had to do this, and I purposely refrained from mentioning Phil's name. I have been asked repeatedly and continually, do I believe in UFOs? And this is my answer. And this is a photograph of me that was done years ago with the famous Omni magazine article. I was featured in Omni many years back about my information. So I say to them, I don't believe. I know. I've had the same people ask questions about, do I believe in God? And I give them the same answer. No, I don't believe in God. I know. I have to end with this, forgive me. Our ancestors called this lovely lady Gaia. They held that the planet was a living being. The ancient Greeks, the Romans, the Sumerians, all of the ancient cultures looked upon the planet as a living being. And they always gave her a feminine nature. The goddess Gaia, the goddess of life. And since the astronauts took this picture some years back, I like to end with it because it says a lot for me, because I do believe that this lovely lady is alive. She has a circulatory system, she has a respiratory system, she breathes, and she has bred the human species. And I look upon her as probably our cocoon, our womb, our mother. And I have learned in my 72 years that I do believe in the depth of my heart that everything in the universe is alive. It's filled with consciousness, and it's filled with intelligence, and it's filled with life. And I mean everything is alive. And you guys are probably one of the finest examples of that manifestation of life. And I want to bring my presentation to a close, and hopefully we have a time for a question or two. And I want to close with a quote that I've used over the years from one of my favorite writers, philosophers. I've been an admirer of Leo Tolstoy for many years. He was a great Russian writer, mystic, deeply religious man. No, beyond that, he wasn't religious, he was spiritual. He transcended religion. And Leo said repeatedly throughout his life and throughout his work, and I say this to you because you're in for some trying times. If you think the last century has been a hell, as I said, that you ain't seen nothing yet. But I like to look at the brighter side of it. I like to look at the hopeful side of it because I see a new world beginning as the old world ends. But to quote Tolstoy, I would like to leave you with these words. He repeatedly made clear throughout his life and his writings, he says there is something in the human spirit that will survive and will prevail. There is a light that will not go out, no matter how dark the world becomes. And I believe in that light, and I believe in you people. And I believe in that spirit within you. And that light will not go out. And my last remark to you this evening is, in the name of God, love one another more. Thank you.